Tips from Trestle, the Senior Living Food and Hospitality podcast, is brought to you by eMenu Choice Point of Sale and Clark Pro. Welcome to Tips from Trestle, the Senior Living Food and Hospitality podcast. This podcast explores the senior living industry with a unique focus on food, hospitality, and the community experience. I'm your host, Aaron Fish. My goal for this podcast: educate, inform, and inspire leaders in senior living. How? By bringing the resident and customer experience to the front of mind in our industry. We should bring the passionate spirit of food and hospitality to everything that we do and everyone we serve each and every day. So what are we waiting for? Let's get to it. Today on Tips from Trestle, I'm joined by Jonathan Pinsker. Jonathan is a Regional Culinary Director with Axe Life Retirement Communities, and we're coming to you live from the Senior Dining Synergy Expo here in Orlando. So, Jonathan, thanks for joining me today on Tips from Trestle.
Great to be here, Aaron. Thank you.
So, obviously, the first question, how's the conference been for you so far?
It's a great conference because I'm able to speak to my peers, hear some of the great ideas that they're doing, hopefully take some of those back to my communities. But it's nice when you have people that are in the same boat that you're in,
Right.
struggling, same struggle in the business world. It makes you feel a little better. It really does.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Especially having gone from operator to consultant, sometimes you get a little disconnected because you're not working in it every single day with peers, but this is a great place to reconnect. And so the reason I've got you on the podcast is you're here at the conference and you've got a really unique presentation you're giving. You're doing a breakout session on helping dining directors, dining operators better understand specific holiday traditions. You're speaking about Jewish holiday traditions, so we'll talk about that, but I definitely want to talk a little bit general about it too. So first of all, what was kind of the driving factor when you were putting this presentation together?
So this presentation is a little unique.
Right.
It's part history, part religious instruction, and we weave food into these holidays.
Okay.
So being in the communities, what I've noticed, residents love information. We've got a lot of people come out to the communities, whether it's book talks, talk about history, and residents are really engaged in that. So this is another way actually for the food service to kind of work with and give information to the residents that just don't know.
Yeah.
And the irony is when I was thinking about it and I was talking to my peers here, telling them about my presentation, the common statement was, well, I really don't have a lot of Jewish people in the community.
Right.
And my reply was, then you're the person that should be there. The ones that know all this stuff, they don't need to be there. They have a great understanding.
Yeah.
But this is something you can share with your residents. You can put on a Passover Seder for your community. It's something new. It's something interesting. So,
yeah, that's a really great point, right? Because, when I think about, well, you got to know how to run a kosher kitchen, or you got to be able to do, understand Muslim traditions or whatever it might be, right? We always kind of, well, I don't serve that population, right? So we just kind of, well, I don't need to worry about that. But you make a point that's really important, is that it's good for everyone to experience these different cultural experiences, because there may be like the history of it, but there's also lots of just great things that can come from that. Great foods. I mean, we think about food across cultures, it's amazing. And so let's specifically talk about Jewish holidays. What are some of the Jewish holidays that our listeners, our dining operators can focus in on developing a program like what you're talking about?
sure. So probably the biggest one and the most common one would be Passover. And it's funny, the reason people probably know the most about Passover is because of the movie, The Ten Commandments.
Right.
That's what it's based on. It's based on Exodus and the Jewish people leaving Egypt and the plagues. And the last plague is specific of the story of Passover. So that is the most common one. At one of my communities in Boca, high Jewish population, we've done up to 300 people from Passover Seder.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's great. Of course, the most common one in society as far as the country goes would probably be Hanukkah.
Yeah.
It's the Jewish equivalent, of course, to Christmas.
Right.
So those are two. And then, of course, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, those are what we consider the high holidays. One is really a New Year's celebration, and one is more of a somber one where, you're kind of repenting, asking for forgiveness.
So in thinking about kind of the more traditional, maybe Christian type of focus, some of the holidays you just talked about are very familiar to those. And so obviously we're at the Senior Dining Conference, so we're talking about food. What kinds of foods should operators think about when they're trying to do something like a Jewish experience for a holiday?
So for the holidays, some of these holidays are really unique, and foods are actually tied direct to the holidays for sometimes unusual reasons. So if you look at like Passover, it's very common. There's something they call a Seder plate, and there are 6 different foods on the Seder plate. They all have meaning, whether it's a boiled egg, a lamb shank, and they have very exact meanings, what they stand for. All of them having to do with the Israelis or the Jewish people like in Egypt. But a lot of the foods are similar for all these holidays. So how they came about, there really is no explanation, but things like brisket, Cornish hen, gefilte fish, matzo ball soup, that was man-made. It didn't come down to higher authority. So I did a lot of research. I was curious, and it's totally man-made. But some of the holidays have to do around like Hanukkah. It's an unusual one. Basically, fried food. And something I really never knew, and I thought I tried to find where the correlation was. Of course, Hanukkah, Festival of Lights, and it was based around the oil in the temple.
Yeah.
They had enough for one day, but it lasted for 8, and that was a miracle. So really, the fruits are based on things fried in oil.
Okay.
It was unusual. For Rosh Hashanah, it's more sweet. For a sweet New Year, new beginning. That's the main crux there. And Yom Kippur is a little different, much more serious holiday.
Yeah.
We mourn the people that have left us. And the big thing is what we call break the fast. That's part of the tradition is fasting, kind of asking God to forgive us, actually for sins towards Him. That's where that came about.
Got it.
And after the fast is a huge celebration, and mostly based on dairy, or a lot of people call it carved food. And you learn a lot about that also. An interesting thing, Coca-Cola, although it is kosher, was not kosher for Passover.
Really?
I had no idea.
Interesting.
I wondered why, and of course did the research. There's a plethora of information. It was the high level of fructose. So Coke has actually put out a product where they lowered the formulation and lowered the fructose. So that's why you see some products specifically say kosher for Passover.
Okay. That's interesting because I've seen the carb label, I've seen the kosher, and that makes a lot of sense. And so one of the things that you just mentioned that we talk about food, right? And all the different special foods. But I think, I mentioned kosher earlier, and a lot of people struggle with that. So if you don't run a kosher kitchen, if you don't have that kind of setup, what would you tell an operator they can do to be successful with this? Can you do kosher like? Is that okay? Like, what's the nuance there that they need to understand?
Yeah, kosher like is a very common terminology.
Right.
A lot of the delicacies, they were not claimed to be kosher like, and a lot of Jewish people will go to them. Kosher is really just the method that the food is slaughtered a lot of the time.
Right.
It's supposed to be a very humane way, and that's how that came about. Of course, you're paying for that as well. Even communities that are predominantly Jewish will not be kosher.
Really?
Now, they will find a way to accommodate those residents, but it will not be produced in the community. To be produced in the community, it's a big deal. And you go down to Miami, absolutely, it does exist.
Yeah.
But I know there's a community in Boca that sits actually on the property of the Jewish Federation that obviously probably well into the 90% are Jewish, but they're not kosher. There are a few. I spoke to the people there, and they actually bring it in from the outside. So it's gone through the inspection, and it's all kosher, you may say. So.
Right.
Technology continues to drive changes in senior care, and that includes food service. eMenu Choice is an award-winning point-of-service application for managing the dining function in senior living communities. This mobile, touchscreen-enabled software enhances the dining experience for residents while streamlining processes for staff. The flexibility and functionality of eMenu Choice makes it an effective solution for any type of senior living environment, from independent and assisted living to skilled nursing facilities. It works for production kitchens or restaurant-style service with options for per meal or a la carte pricing, and accommodates a variety of payments, including bill to account, meal credits, and credit cards. Created by a senior care provider with more than a century of experience serving older adults, eMenu Choice eliminates communication barriers between staff and residents while enabling person-centered choices and greater resident satisfaction. eMenu Choice, transforming dining for senior living.
Exactly. So, well, one of the things that I think is important, especially because, here at the conference, it's mostly dining, but we talk about hospitality. I'm a big proponent of it's a community experience, right? It's not like the food leads into the activities and activities lead into satisfaction, but it all is one big circle, right? And so when you're thinking about not just the food aspect of the holiday, but you want to bring in and create the event, you want to understand the history, you want to do education. What are the best ways or some of the successful tips you can share about being able to develop those internal partnerships to make these events go off without a hitch?
Sure. So part of my presentation does focus on how to engage the residents, because if they're not engaged, it doesn't pay. So first of all, like I mentioned earlier, having an outsider come in to give a speech, talk about the history, talk about the traditions, the why, the how. It is quite interesting, because these weren't things that were developed last month,
Right.
April, you're talking thousands of years ago. So it is very interesting. The second thing is resident involvement. So when we did a Seder at our house, Passover, and my grandfather kind of oversaw it, but the way we did it is we all read from the book and we all participated. So even in our small group, it was important for him to get us involved. There was only 10 of us. So there is another way. Also, I had a community in Alabama during the Christmas holiday. Residents would have their own small little trees, and they would decorate it. They would have 40 of them, and they would line the lobby. It was really a great spectacle.
That's kind of cool.
Well, I'm sure if you're in a Jewish community, a lot of residents will have Seder plates. They could be very plain or very, fancy. Same thing with menorahs. If you look at menorahs, thousands, and you can do that as well. But like you said, it is important to get them involved and run it like it's any other function. Just learn about what to do, what to serve, the whys. Have a religious service. It's not a big deal. We have in our Jewish community, people go to the other services. So I think residents just have a level of interest in knowing and learning, and that's the important.
Yeah. And so I want to take it up a little bit. When you're thinking about doing this for other religions or other special events, is there really anything that you need to do different? Can you standardize your processes as far as hey, we're doing this for Passover, or we're doing this for Yom Kippur, but then we've got, Ramadan, or you've got, the Easter, for example. We're kind of familiar with some of those, but is the process similar, or do you need to approach it in different ways? Or
no, for me, once you develop a process, especially when you're trying to push this out into multiple communities, you have to develop, systems and processes for them.
Right.
So, for research, luckily today we're in the information era, so it's all out there. You can find the information. Definitely bring in outside support. People that are in that business, I guess, it is a business of religion.
Right.
They are more than willing and want to educate, because they are at some point all educators.
Yeah.
Not that they're trying to convert you, but they do want to get out, what they do, why they do it. So absolutely follow a script. A script is great. The residents get used to it, and it's easier for you to implement. The foods are available anywhere. So I would say do the research, bring in someone from the outside. You do the research for the food as well. Like, get the resident involved, and maybe the speech is the involvement. And I think it works very smoothly. And you can do this all throughout the year. There are so many holidays and traditions, and it's really, listen, I'm Jewish, and I learned information. So the menorah had 8, slots. It does not. It had 7 slots. So this was man-made, and, a lot of religion is, man or woman influence. So the education is really fascinating.
Yeah, no, and I really like that because, I think it's important when we're doing programming around food that it's not just what's on the plate, right? It's got to be more than that. And so the kind of as we wrap up here, I do want to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of staffing and doing that. And so, well, if you could give 2 or 3 tips on how to do the staff in the right way, how to educate staff, I think that'd be really helpful for our operator listeners to take in.
Sure. So if you're in a Jewish community or whatever holiday you're presenting, a little easier because they won't require as much of the communication. Now, the big difference with these holidays, it's everyone in at once. You got to keep that in mind. That's the way it is. And do reservations. So there's good and bad, of course, right? Funneling in 300 seniors, it takes a half hour to do that.
Right.
So the good thing is we treat it like a bank. It's a very limited menu. We even take orders in advance. A portion of it is done family style. So we have a lot more staff, but it's a lot quicker service.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It comes in, we do some pre-plating. There's no waste involved because we know exactly, what they're eating because they choose ahead of time. Now, you're not at the community that celebrates the holiday. You need to give your staff, especially the front of the house, some level of education. Because you may be asked questions that they may not be able to answer readily.
Good point.
So, but that's always going to happen. But it's important to understand you can't treat it like reservation. You really have to do it banquet style because there are some things that'll be on the table. Like if you're serving latkes, put the applesauce on the table or the sour cream, things like that. But make sure you know what you're doing. That's why the research is vital. Really, truly is.
So one thing that comes from what you're telling me is, I think this is an obstacle sometimes that keeps people from doing this, is the cost. They feel like it's going to be more expensive because they got to buy all this specialty foods and everything. But what I hear you saying is the way you've approached it and the way you and your teams do these events is that it really winds up being more cost effective because you're better able to manage and control things. And so I think that's a really big takeaway for all of that. And so one last question for someone who is not sure where to start, they want to find an outside resource. What would you recommend, or where would you recommend they go to find the starting point or the person that can maybe help them get going?
I'd say there are 2 areas. Of course, the internet, it's loaded. I mean, you just type in, and I found a lot of information. But I still think referencing people, let's say you're going to do temple, go to a temple and say you want to talk to a rabbi. Believe me, they will love to spend time to educate you, and they will come into your community and do that. People are so willing because, like I said, their job, besides delivering a spiritual or religious message, they are educators. All of them are. So that's what they went to school for, most of them, some level of theology. So those are the 2 best ways to do it. And like anything else, it's got to be a fun experience. If it's not fun, it won't happen. So have fun.
So absolutely. Well, Jonathan, I'm excited to be, it's this afternoon, your session. So I'm excited to be there and to hear you dive into this in way more detail. So, but I appreciate you stopping by the booth here, and thanks for joining me today on Tips from Trestle.
Thanks for having me, Aaron. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
So there it is, everybody. Another one in the books. Thanks again for tuning in. Please follow, like, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on social media at Tips from Trestle. You can also learn more about the work I do by following me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. And be sure to check out Trestle Hospitality Concepts at www.trestle. I'm your host, Aaron Fish, and this has been another episode of Tips from Trestle.